My boss fired me for being too expensive after 18 years leading engineering. His panic calls. Please stay with me as I tell my story. And please, do not forget to support our channel by subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, and sharing your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to our story. MPO. I spent 18 years working for that company. I was there before the engineering department even existed. I hired the first team, built the systems, and kept the place running through power outages, server crashes, and last-minute deadlines. I missed birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries to meet company goals. I stayed late to help others when no one else would. I gave everything I had. Then one Monday, I walked in and saw an envelope on my desk. Inside was a letter from HR, signed by my boss. It said my position had been eliminated due to budget cuts. The note was short, cold, and ended with, "You've become too expensive." At first, I just sat there staring. My hands were shaking. After everything I'd done for them, this was how they thanked me? Not even a face-to-face conversation. Just a letter. I packed up my desk in silence. Coworkers avoided eye contact. Some whispered. A few looked shocked, but no one said anything. It was like I had become invisible overnight. On the drive home, the anger started building. I remembered all the nights I worked overtime without asking for more. The time I caught a system bug minutes before a major client demo and saved the deal. The younger engineers I mentored who now sat in leadership roles, all trained by me. I wasn't just an employee. I was the backbone of that department, and suddenly, I was labeled as too expensive. That night, I didn't sleep. I thought about every sacrifice I had made, and then something inside me shifted. If they thought they could just toss me aside, I'd show them what expensive really meant. I wasn't going to beg to come back. I wasn't going to send angry emails. I was going to wait. Watch. I knew how their systems worked better than anyone. I knew which engineers relied on me for answers. I knew the client accounts that trusted me, not the company. They thought cutting me would save money. What they didn't realize was how much value walked out with. A week later, I got my first call from a junior engineer. Something had broken. A bug no one could fix. I didn't pick up. A few hours later, another call came in. Then a message from the head of IT. And then my old boss called. I smiled and let it go to voicemail. Let him sweat. This was just the beginning. After they fired me, management thought they had it all figured out. Instead of hiring another experienced engineer, they brought in 3 interns fresh out of college. No real-world experience. No understanding of our systems. Just cheap labor with shiny resumes and the promise of fresh energy. They handed them my responsibilities, my entire workload, and expected things to run smoothly. I'd spent nearly 2 decades building that infrastructure. It wasn't something you could just hand over with a binder of notes and wish them luck. At first, they were confident. The leadership team even sent out a cheerful announcement calling it a bold step toward innovation and efficiency. I chuckled when I read that. I knew what was coming. Within 2 weeks, the cracks started showing. The interns didn't understand the layered back-end integrations I'd built. They pushed untested code straight to production. One of them accidentally overwrote a critical file that caused an entire client portal to go offline for hours. The support team was overwhelmed with tickets. Clients were locked out of their dashboard. Some lost access to years of stored data. Panic spread like wildfire. Then came the contract fallout. One of our biggest clients, who I had personally onboarded and maintained, missed a major software update because the new team forgot to schedule it. Their entire workflow froze, and they threatened legal action for breach of agreement. The company tried to scramble. Managers held emergency Zoom calls. The interns were blamed, but the truth was clear. Leadership had failed. They thought they could cut corners and save money by hiring 3 people to replace one. But none of them had the experience, instincts, or system knowledge I did. Delivery timelines started slipping. What used to take me 2 days now took the new team over a week. And even then, it came with bugs and follow-up issues. Internal teams began complaining. The sales department couldn't promise anything to clients because they didn't trust engineering to deliver. I heard all of this through the grapevine. Friends still on the inside sent me updates, screenshots, meeting recaps. One message simply read, "It's a mess without you." And then the lawsuits came. 2 clients filed formal complaints, demanding compensation for lost revenue. One even threatened to terminate their multi-year contract early. All of it stemmed from missed deadlines, failed updates, and broken systems. Systems I used to maintain flawlessly. They tried to save a few $1,000s by letting me go. Instead, they almost destroyed everything I helped build. It was a Thursday afternoon when it happened. The company had been preparing for a major client presentation for me. It was a multi-million-dollar deal that would have locked in 5 years of recurring revenue. I had designed the original system they were demoing, custom backend, smart reporting, smooth integration with the client's platform. Every piece had been tested and optimized by me before they let me go. I wasn't surprised when I heard they were planning to showcase it without me. In fact, I'd expected it. What I didn't expect was how badly they'd mess it up. They had patched together an unstable build, filled with last-minute edits from the new team. The interns had done their best, but they didn't understand the architecture. They pushed code that hadn't been QA tested. The demo environment wasn't isolated from the live server, and no one caught the broken API that I had personally warned them about 6 months ago. The day of the meeting, the CEO, CTO, and the top sales reps sat in a glass-walled conference room with a table full of important clients. They began the demo with confidence, clicking through the platform. The first few screens loaded. Then the dashboard froze. The charts didn't populate. Error messages flashed. And then it crashed. Dead silence. One of the clients leaned back and said, "So this is what we're paying for?" Another laughed and asked, "Was this built in a garage?" The sales team fumbled with excuses. The CTO's face went pale. They tried to reboot the demo twice. Same results. Then a new bug appeared. This one pulled data from a completely different client. Major breach. That's when I got the call. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then again, this time from a company contact. I answered just to hear the panic. It was the CTO, whispering from the hallway, "We need you. Now. It's failing. They're about to walk." I listened, said nothing. Just breathing on the other end. He went on. "They asked for you by name. They assumed you'd be running the demo. Please. We'll compensate. Just help." I paused, long enough for him to wonder if the line had gone dead. Then I replied calmly, "Let me think about it." And I hung up. That silence, that pause, was louder than anything I could have screamed. For the first time, they understood. They didn't just lose an engineer. They lost the engineer. After they fired me, they made me sign an NDA. It was thick, pages of legal language meant to scare me. I wasn't allowed to talk about internal systems, share company secrets, or speak badly about them in public. They called it standard policy. I called it a muzzle. But I read every line. Twice. And I noticed something. They rushed to get it signed. Maybe they thought I wouldn't look closely. But in their hurry to protect themselves, they left gaps, loopholes I could use. It didn't say I couldn't talk about my method, the tools I designed, the code I personally wrote before it was property of the company, my strategies, frameworks, and even my work ethic. None of that was covered. So I started talking. Quietly, I reached out to old contacts, people I'd met over the years at conferences and industry meetups. I mentioned I was available for consulting. I didn't bring up the company by name. I didn't have to. Everyone already knew what had happened. Word travels fast in tech, especially when it smells like failure. A week later, I was having coffee with a former client who'd worked with me during a major rollout. He told me their current project was hitting delays. Guess who they were working with now? My old company. He said they missed 2 deadlines and blamed it on new team transitions. I didn't speak badly. I just raised an eyebrow and said, "That's unfortunate. I remember how smooth things used to run." He smiled. "We do too. Want to consult?" I said yes. From that point on, I found myself walking a fine but legal line. I didn't leak information. I didn't break the agreement. But I became the person people called when they were frustrated with the company I once carried. Other clients started asking questions. What happened to me? Was I still working in the same space? Was I interested in partnerships? Competitors started calling too. They'd heard rumors. Some of my former coworkers, now fed up with the chaos, hinted at contracts on the verge of collapse. One company even asked if I'd be willing to train their engineers using the methods I developed. Turns out, an NDA can't stop you from being valuable. It can erase your reputation, your results, or your relationships. They tried to silence me with paperwork. Instead, they handed me a blueprint for starting over, smarter, freer, and this time on my terms. A month after they fired me, I got the call. Not from HR this time, but from the CTO himself. His tone was different, less smug, more strained. He said they were reevaluating past decisions and wanted to offer me a contract to return. Short-term, of course, just to stabilize the team. I told him I appreciated the offer. Then I said, no conditions, no negotiations, just a clean, polite refusal. At the time, I was sitting on the porch of a rented cabin deep in the mountain. No cell service unless I walked up the hill. No emails. Just fresh air, hot coffee, and a stack of unread books. For the first time in years, I was breathing without deadline. While I was there, things back at the company went south. They couldn't meet project milestones. Clients started pulling out or threatening legal action. The new engineers, some interns, some hires they scrambled to onboard, couldn't fix the bugs piling up. And without anyone who understood the full system design, they were left guessing. Guessing led to mistakes. Mistakes led to outages. Outages led to angry clients. My phone started buzzing again. Not from them, but from former teammates. They still cared enough to tell me what was happening. Another client left today. Your system failed and no one knew how to restart it. 2 engineers quit this week. One of them said, "This ship's going down." The CEO held a company-wide meeting to boost morale. Half the team turned their cameras off. I laughed when one of them sent me a screenshot from LinkedIn. My old job posting was live again, same title, but with a 40% higher salary and a bonus package. Same responsibilities, same expectations, different price tag. They were willing to pay someone else more than they ever paid me. They thought money could fix what they broke. But it wasn't about salary. It was about respect, about loyalty, about not treating people like parts to be replaced. Every update I got made me more certain I'd made the right call. While they spiraled, I was hiking trails, watching the sun rise over quiet hills. I cooked real meals, slept through the night. I remembered what life felt like when it wasn't spent putting out fires for people who didn't value you. They thought they could replace me. Instead, they replaced stability with chaos. And all I had to do was say no. 3 months after I was let go, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone I didn't recognize. Short message, polite. It started with, "Hey, I know we've never met, but I think we have some overlap." He introduced himself as the new VP of engineering, the person they hired to replace me. I stared at the screen for a second. That's how I found out they had finally filled my position. I was curious, so I responded. Kept it friendly, professional. He replied instantly. Said he'd been meaning to reach out for weeks. That he'd heard a lot about me from the team. Said it with a kind of nervous respect, like a student talking to the retired professor whose textbook he was still trying to understand. Eventually, he got to the point. "I've inherited a mess," he wrote. "And to be honest, I'm not sure how they managed to run things before without falling apart." I almost laughed. He said the systems were duct-taped together by interns who barely understood the architecture. Documentation was spotty. Some builds were completely missing version control. The CI/CD pipeline I'd spent years perfecting had been torn apart and put back together wrong. One by one, the key engineers I had trained had either quit or were looking for a way out. The project management system was chaos. Bugs stayed open for weeks. They had lost 2 major clients already. Another was threatening to pull their contract early. Then came the real gem. He said, "They keep expecting me to fix it. But honestly, it feels like I've been handed a house that's on fire and told to paint the walls." He wasn't asking me to come back, not directly, but he wanted advice. Wanted to know how I'd handled certain workflows, how I kept the ship running, how I trained the team to think 3 steps ahead instead of just reacting. I thought about it for a while. Part of me wanted to help. He seemed like a decent guy. But another part of me remembered the letter. The one that said I was too expensive. The one that ended 18 years of loyalty with a signature and a HRCC. So I gave him something small. A tip about a legacy module he was struggling with. Nothing too deep. Just enough to help. He thanked me, then added, "Honestly, they should have never let you go." That was the moment. Not the chaos. Not the bugs. Not even the client losses. It was hearing that from the guy they hired to replace me. He didn't say it to flatter me. He said it because it was true. And the truth always finds a way to slide into your DMs eventually. When I first joined the company nearly 2 decades ago, I didn't just sign the standard offer. I had a lawyer friend look over everything. Back then, we were a small startup, and they needed me more than I needed them. So I asked for a few small adjustments in my contract. Nothing major on the surface, but enough to give me some leverage if things ever went sideways. They agreed without much thought. Everyone was focused on building the product, finding funding, and surviving those early years. No one expected the company to grow as fast as it did, least of all the CEO. One clause, buried on page 6, was about intellectual property. It stated that any tools, systems, or frameworks I created independently, even while employed, would remain mine unless the company specifically requested and documented ownership transfer. They never did. Over the years, I built custom tools to improve performance, streamline code reviews, and manage client integrations. These weren't part of the original product. They were my own side projects, designed during weekends and nights. I used them to help the team, but I never signed them over. No one ever asked. When I was let go, they assumed they still had access to everything I had built. But a week later, they ran into a wall. The tools stopped syncing. Some services needed manual intervention. The automation broke. Clients began to notice delays. That's when I got the email, not from the CEO, but from legal. They asked for access keys and deployment rights. Said they assumed those systems were property of the company. I replied with a scanned page from my contract, highlighted the clause, then added a short note. These assets were never transferred. I was never compensated for. I've simply stopped maintaining what I own. Silence for 3 days. Then came a call from the CEO himself. His voice was tight, polite, but clearly forced. He said there'd been a misunderstanding and asked if I'd be open to licensing the tools back on a short-term basis. I paused, then said, I'd consider it. At consultant rates. He didn't respond right away. Just let out a long sigh. He never knew that I had planned for this moment. Not because I expected to be fired, but because I understood the game. The same people who praise your loyalty will turn around and call you a cost. But paper doesn't forget. And contracts don't care about hurt feeling. When they tried to cut me out, they discovered they'd never actually owned the keys to the kingdom. They just borrowed them. They thought letting me go would be easy. As if they could hand my responsibilities to someone else, drop in a few replacements, and expect everything to keep running. What they forgot was, I didn't just work on the infrastructure. I built it. From scratch. The entire backend system, the one that handled data intake, validation, transformation, client-facing dashboards, reporting logic, and internal analytics, was mine. Not in name, but in design. I architected it when we had nothing but ideas on a whiteboard and late-night pizza. I knew every line of code, every shortcut, every workaround. And yes, I made it efficient, fast, secure. But not simple, not by mistake. Complexity wasn't sabotage, it was protection. I had seen too many rushed companies slap together systems that fell apart once they scaled. So I built ours with layers, encapsulation, event-driven logic that needed context, not just documentation. It worked beautifully if you understood how the pieces spoke to each other. After they fired me, they found out the hard way. Someone tried to reroute a core API. It broke the report scheduler. They modified a database schema without updating the ingest validator. Half the client files failed silently. They tried to roll out a UI redesign without syncing the permission structure. Users saw other people's data. A potential compliance disaster. The new team thought the system was just over-engineered. They didn't realize every piece had a reason, a purpose, a chain reaction waiting if handled wrong. I didn't do anything to sabotage them. I didn't have to. The complexity of the system was the failsafe. Not because it was hidden, but because it required understanding. And no one left understood it like I did. One of my friends inside sent me a message. They're rebuilding entire parts of the back end because no one knows how anything works. Another said, they had a meeting today asking if you used any custom logging tools. No one can find them. They did exist. They just didn't know where to look. And then came the best part. A former client, frustrated after a week of silence, emailed me directly, not asking for help, just to vent. Their system had gone down. No response from support. They wrote, "Didn't you build all this?" I replied, "Yes, I did." When you're the architect of the foundation, you don't need to tear anything down to make a point. You just step away and let the cracks reveal themselves. About a week after I was let go, I got a call from a number I hadn't seen in years. When I answered, the voice on the other end didn't waste time with small talk. "They fired you?" he said, flat and sharp. It was Daniel, one of the company's earliest and most influential investors. We'd met years ago during a funding round. Back then, he didn't care much for titles or slideshows. He wanted to meet the people actually building the product. So we talked tech. I showed him our roadmap. He asked tough questions. I gave honest answers. We ended up grabbing coffee afterward, just the two of us. We kept in touch. Now he was calling me out of the blue, clearly furious. They told me it was a strategic restructure, he said. Cost optimization. I asked them if they'd lost their mind. Apparently, no one on the board had been consulted before they cut me loose. The CEO tried to spin it as a necessary move for growth, saying fresh talent would bring in new ideas. Daniel didn't buy it. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was actually better than okay. I explained I was consulting now, free to pick my own clients, my own projects. No more fire drills or late-night emails. He paused, then said, "Good, because I'm not putting another dollar into that circus." What happened next was something I never expected. He didn't just walk away. He started making calls, first to the board, then to other investors. He asked questions they didn't want to answer. Why was engineering productivity down? Why were clients leaving? Why had 2 senior developers resigned in the last month? The pressure started to build. Within 2 weeks, I heard from someone inside that the CEO had been called into a closed-door meeting. The board was split. Some still supported him, but others wanted a vote. They blamed the fallout, missed deadlines, damaged client relationships, on leadership's decision-making. And Daniel, he doubled down. He began quietly investing in a competitor, one that had just poached 2 of my former teammates, one that had just hired me as a consultant. I didn't burn any bridges, but I didn't need to. The ones they thought were secure collapsed all on their own. When the people funding your future believe in the people you fired more than they believe in you, you're already losing. They thought they'd cut off a cost. Instead, they cut off their credibility. And it was the investors, not the engineers, who made sure they paid the price. After they fired me, I took some time off. No plans. Just quiet mornings, long walks, and thinking. At first, I didn't know what was next. I'd spent so many years building their systems, leading their teams, that I had forgotten what it felt like to build something for myself. But the more I relaxed, the clearer it became. I wasn't done. I just needed a different direction, one where I had control. So I started something small, a consulting firm. No big launch, no press. Just me, my laptop, and a clear idea. Help companies avoid the kind of mess my old employer created. Quietly, I set up the business, reached out to a few trusted contacts, and began picking up projects. Word spread. Then something interesting happened. An engineer I had trained years ago called me. He said he'd heard I was working independently. He was tired of the chaos at the company. He asked if I had space for one more. Then another reached out. Then two more. All of them were people I'd mentored. People who stayed late with me to solve problems, who grew under my guidance. They didn't just want a job, they wanted to build something again. Together, in just a few months, I had a team. One day, I got a message from a former client. They were frustrated with delays, bugs, and silence from the company. They asked if I was available to help fix it. I said yes. That client was one of their biggest contracts. We didn't just fix the problems, we rebuilt their system from the ground up. Better, faster, and with fewer people. They moved the entire account over to my firm. Quietly, no press. Just a signed deal and a firm handshake. From there, it grew fast. My company didn't need buzz. Results spoke louder. While we kept moving, my old employer struggled. More engineers quit. Clients complained. New hires came and left just as quickly. I never spoke against them. I didn't have to. Their actions did all the talking. What they saw as a cost to cut became a competitor they couldn't stop. The talent they overlooked followed the one person who had believed in them from the start. Now I wake up excited. I choose my projects. I trust my team. And we do work that matters. They thought they ended my story, but all they really did was fund the beginning of a better one.